Hi, this is Rachel Hacking. It's like I tell my dog, if you behave, you will get treats. But I can tell you, you ain't getting nothing listening to Soupkast.
Welcome to the surface of Superbike Planet.
The SuperbikePlanet.com podcast, Soupkast, is brought to you by American Honda.
Hi, and welcome to Soupkast. Soupkast is the official podcast of the SuperbikePlanet.com website. This is Soupkast for November 30th, 2007. We're live, somewhat live, at the Dunlop tire test at Daytona International Speedway. Tonight, we're joined by an all-star cast, including Josh Hayes, former Extreme Champion.
How you doing?
Former racer, former Canadian.
Wait a minute. Still Canadian and American.
current Dunlop tire engineer, Jim Allen. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Dean.
And Al Ludington, longtime Super Wrench and crew chief of Miguel Duhamel's Honda Superbike.
Evening.
So where do we start off, Josh? Are you healthy, or what's your status after the Laguna Seca round?
Other than feeling like I got kneecapped by getting married about a month after, the Laguna Seca thing, I feel great. Actually, I've been able to get out and do some motocross. I've been training a lot on the bicycle, and I'm healthy, man. I'm good to go. I felt great on the motorcycle today.
Really tumultuous day at Laguna. Can you go through it a little? You were on the ground. You were off the ground.
Yeah, it was a pretty crazy weekend.
You're at the party.
It was a pretty crazy weekend, We came in there with pretty high expectations. Super Sport kicked things off and got up to speed really quick. Felt great with it. Thought, man, I'm going to go out and really show them how to do it on this FX bike. And went out there and spent a lap or two kind of getting up to speed. I want to say it was a third or fourth lap. Thing got away from me a little bit on side grip on the drive coming out of two and sent me for quite the ride. I remember thinking, man, I've been up here in the air for an awful long time. You gotta come down eventually. And when I did, I landed on both feet. Unfortunately, I felt something like that before. I remember coming up short on a triple on a motocross bike one time and bailing off the bike and taking it on the feet. And so both feet were burning pretty bad, but I was able to kind of get up and walk around a little bit. Went and checked with medical. And he said, well, yeah, your right toe's definitely broken. Your left foot, and he jammed his thumb into it. He goes, I think it's just bruised, and I was crying at that point. And I said, okay, buddy. So we strapped the boots back on and had Doc Ellaby take my big toenail off right before we went out for qualifying, 2 hours later. And I was eating my lunch.
But it was a pretty easy day, right?
And rolled out, and I was pretty surprised by being able to get the pole time. I thought, man, these guys are going to give it to me. They're not on their game. And so we got away with pole. We left there immediately, went straight to the hospital, took some x-rays. And tell you what, Doc Ellaby's got some friends out there because I snuck into the x-ray room and back out. And I was like a ninja. Nobody knew I was there. I never signed a piece of paperwork. We had copies of the x-rays. We were in and out, gone. It was great. And foot was definitely broken, a good bit worse than we thought. And so just tried to get a good night's sleep. Practice didn't go too bad. I think we were maybe P1 or I think we were P2 in practice, and felt great about the race. And we get that going, and we found some of the things that was a little different, being able to do clean laps by myself. I got to race them with those guys and was struggling with my spots at the racetrack, and had a good race going on, was getting to see some good action. Jamie working on Josh Herron in front of me, and finally thought I was going to get a good shot at Jamie, and I was riding really close to Jamie, trying to make sure any opportunity that came there, I was more than on top of it, and just kind of ended up getting a little bit close company, ended up going off the racetrack. I remember ending up out on the curb, and saying, man, I just got to try to stay on the edge of the track so I can keep fighting, but ended up going off turn 6, and that's about all I remember from that one. I remember waking up in the ambulance, and I said, where's Melissa? And she was there, and doctor was talking to me about my broken foot, and I said, man, what are you talking about, dude? He said, you don't remember breaking your foot? And about 15 minutes later, I looked at Melissa and I said, I did break my foot yesterday, didn't I? She said, yeah. I said, okay. So we took a little ride to the hospital. You know, that always goes well. I sat in there for a long time and watched people really injured. They wouldn't let me get off the chair. I'm like, I just want to go home. And luckily they gave me a little shot, made me feel a little better right before I did leave. So we had to come back and get our car at the track anyway. I figured I'd stop by the after party and say hi to everybody, and went home.
Yeah, and then you got married.
And then I got married. You know, I think the marriage was a highlight. I was back in regular shoes, so I got to walk in shoes for the wedding, and it was just about the right timing on everything. And you know, I was still probably feeling the lumps from Laguna, though. I got to tell you, that was I really felt good about that championship. A lot of things had not gone my way up to that point, but I felt like I was riding strong, and I wanted it really, really, really bad. And I was trying, but I guess I have to go get them this year.
Little added drama with the battery strap issue on the line.
Yeah, you know, that was another good surprise. I don't want to say anything bad, but I think racing for Attack Performance kind of helped prepare me for things like that. You know, Richard was pretty good at some last minute stuff. Yeah, you know, we had some issues with that Superbike from time to time. He prepared me well. I kept my cool. I got a good start. Man, he had me ready to go. You know, he trained me well.
Jim, what can we say to follow that up?
No, it sounds like Josh might be a racer. Let me get this straight. He's on top of the world 1 minute, the next minute he's flying through it. That sounds like a racer to me.
Absolutely. Jim, you finished up the season with a big mountain bike ride, didn't you? Can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, you really want to know about that?
I do. It sounded like an epic journey.
It was an awesome trip. It really was. We've a good friend of mine that I've used to race with a long time ago, and I have mountain biked in Utah. We've gone there the last 8 years in a row, I think. You know, we go there and just do a week and sometimes camp in the desert, sometimes just ride, sometimes hotel it, sometimes not. But this year we decided to try something different, and we did an awesome trip cross-country. We started in Durango, Colorado, and rode to Moab cross-country for 224 miles, 7 days, and 27,000 feet of climbing. It was really, really an awesome trip. It was absolutely the hardest thing I've ever done physically, for sure. There was days when we were with that. That's an awful damn big hill. I guess we got to go up it because there's more after that, I understand. But we had a really good time. We started in Durango. First day, started at 8,800 feet, climbed to 11,400, and then we did basically go from cabin to cabin or hut to hut, they call it, and you pay this company, and all the heavy stuff you would normally carry on your bicycle when you do touring was in the huts, the food and the sleeping bag and all that stuff. So we didn't have to carry a tent, and it was really awesome. We had 4 good guys, and we just had an awesome trip. It was, for sure, it was something I'd do again. You know, I'm not really sure that when we were on top of that 11,000 foot mountain on day 3, and the sleet was hitting me in the side of the face, and my hands were freezing cold, and the snow was on the tires. Didn't seem like a really good idea, that particular point in the trip. But
see, there you go. That's something racers won't even do. You mentioned sleet and snow. No, we're fair weather trainers.
But it was good. I'd like to do something like that again. It was good fun.
Do you get the same satisfaction or lack of satisfaction from mountain biking that you did from racing? Because you were a really competitive racer.
I'm in my own level, I'm a really competitive mountain biker too. You know, yeah, it's fun. For sure. I guess I'm a competitive guy, and when I raced, you know, I did pretty well, and when it came time to quit, there was a big void there. It's hard to fill that void, and I tried a bunch of things, and not so much. The cycling didn't immediately replace hiking or motorcycling. I tried hiking for a while and some other stuff, but yeah, I mean, I just like to do as well as I can, and I think part of racing, as I recall, is just digging down deeper and finding you got more. And when you cycle, the people that do that ride bicycles and that kind of stuff, and maybe other sports as well. But when push comes to shove, if you want to hang on to the group, if you're riding in a road, if you want to hang on, sometimes you got to really, really dig in and say, I got to give this another 30 seconds. I got to get ready to puke, you know. And if you get back on the group, then you can hold your own sometimes. And when you mountain bike, if you're looking at it, you know, this trip we did, there was one climb that was 2,000 feet and 3 miles. So it was pretty damn formidable, you know, and it's just like, okay, this is going to be bad, but I can do this, you know, and stuff. And when you do it, the rewards are there. It's like, I guess, a little bit like racing, you know, if you work hard, hope some days you get rewarded. Some days you end up flying through the air. But yeah, it's not a replacement because I don't think anything can ever replace. For me, I didn't ever find anything that could replace motorcycle racing. You have to go on to something different. And just as Josh is a competitive racer now, and Al's a competitive tuner, and you know, he wants his guys and he wants his team to be the best, you know, and Josh wants to finish first in the races. You know, I want to do the best I can for Dunlop and my job, and then, you know, my personal endeavors, like, you know, that kind of cycling, that kind of thing, you know.
Al, you're a competitive tuner.
That's what I hear.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Road Atlanta test last year and why we don't have Miguel Duhamel here with us this weekend?
Well, we were testing Road Atlanta. A lot of tires, very, very hot. Can't stress how hot it was. As a matter of fact, I remember one occasion when we tested at Road Atlanta when it was maybe equally as hot or maybe a little hotter, when Jim actually pulled the plug at noontime when it was 114 degrees on pit road. He said, "Hell with this, we're out of here." And that's when he learned to water ski, and I bet he decided that probably wasn't what he wanted to do.
That's what I learned. I learned not how to water ski or how not to water ski.
But at any rate, it was very, very hot there. It was 105. Track temperature was like 150, and we were winding down the test. We were in the afternoon of the second day, and Miguel came down the hill into that corner that everybody loves to hate, and he went into the throttle, and the rear just stepped out. Said, "I'm done. It's too hot. I'm not interested in this." And it was a real horrific crash. I mean, you know, I keep an eye on my stopwatch, and I know when he's coming down the hill, and I look up from my paperwork, and I watch him coming down the hill, and that thing just went like a. You remember them lawn darts when you were a kid that the lawyers probably don't let anybody sell anymore? And you used to throw them underhand and they go about 2 feet off the ground. That's what it looked like. And it was just a horrific, horrific crash. And the bike cleared the air fence out of the way, and then he turned the hay bales into straw, and it was pretty ugly. And, you know, to understand the significance of it, here we are, 4 months later? It was middle of August, and, you know, he's still not quite ready to ride. He's looking good. Training a lot, but the doctor's like, you need a little bit more time there. So it was a pretty ugly situation. There was a little bit of humor in there, depending on your sense of humor. I was probably the third or fourth guy over there, and he was kind of curled up in a ball on the ground. I said, Miguel, you all right? And he holds up one finger, and he goes, "I'm trying to catch my breath." Well, come to find out, he had a collapsed lung and a punctured lung. So, yeah, I guess he's trying to catch his breath, right? So the medical guys get there right away. They said, "Oh, we didn't even have to listen for the radio. We could feel it through the floor of the emergency shack, which is up above that turn. They could feel it right through the floor." And they got his helmet off, made sure he didn't have any neck problems. And he had all this straw and stuff in his face. And I said, "Hang on, I'm going to pour some water on your face and get the straw out of there so you can see." Well, you know, it's 105 degrees out, and I had just pulled this bottle of water out of the cooler. It was probably about 40 degrees. And I wasn't even thinking. I poured it on his face. He's like, "Ah!" I'm like, "Oh, I see you got your breath back." But, you know, not to downplay the significance of it. He took a tremendous beating. And, you know, that's one of those spots on a racetrack that we bitch about and bitch about and bitch about. And then finally we have an incident like this, and that kind of wakes up the track owners and the sanctioning body and stuff that, hey, we really need to do something about this. And it's no different from the concrete wall that used to always sit on, it was at the entrance to the front straightaway on Mid-Ohio. And, you know, we had to kill somebody before they did something about it. And, you know, that kind of stuff needs to stop. But at any rate, yeah, it was horrific to watch. And, you know, it's kind of a testament to Miguel's strength and tenacity, if you will, for him to carry on. But, you know, anybody that knows Miguel knows how tenacious he is. But I have a funny feeling that we will see him in top form come March here.
On the subject of a superbike ride, can you guess what my question's going to be?
It's coming my way.
I got Dean, I got to say, I'm not interested in a superbike ride myself. Thank you.
Politics in my job. What are you talking about?
You didn't get a superbike ride.
No, it didn't happen. It didn't happen.
How do you feel about that?
It hasn't happened before. So, I mean, you know, the hardest part, I guess, I've thought about this a lot. I talk about it a lot with my wife and people who are close to me. And, you know, you get a lot of people that go, hey, buddy, you know, you're lucky you're still racing a motorcycle, getting paid, making a living. You got nothing to complain about. And you know what? In a lot of ways, they're right. I know it. I'm very, very fortunate. And I've worked very hard, and I've made it further than I ever thought I could as a motorcycle racer. I was a guy who was in high school and had no idea what I was going to do next, go to college. And I went and tried a track day and had some fun, decided to play around for a year or two, and one day somebody offered to pay me to do it. And the only problems that I have is that, you know, I've been working so long and so hard, and you go to the people who count and say, hey, what do I have to do to get this job? Because this is our career goal. And they say, well, you need to go win championships. I say, all right. So I'll work my butt off. Well, in 5 years, other than 2 years that I rode on a, you know, privateer superbike, I've won a championship every year that I've gone out there and raced in the last 5 years. And when you do that, and then you go, well, hey, how about my superbike ride? And they go, well, sorry, we don't have anything for you. You know, it's a tough pill to swallow. I think it would be for anybody in my position who's worked that hard. But, you know, what can you do? You know, I can't really, like, be upset about it. I still have a hard job in front of me if I stay in Formula Extreme and Supersport. It's not an easy job. There are very fast riders and some great teams out there. And my goals haven't changed. If you know, my idea is that if I go out there and I keep winning championships, eventually somebody has to give me one of these jobs, I would think. Hey, but Miguel needs to retire and go home. Make room, man.
Good luck.
But, you know, I understand why he's there. He's a great spokesman for the sport. He's a hard riding man and very tenacious, like Al said. And, you know, it is tough because I know it's not going to get any easier to get the job. There's young guys who are riding well that are coming up. Hopefully at some point I'm going to be the guy that, hey, you know what, you know this guy will get you results and you need to put him out there and help develop your motorcycle or whatever it may be. And it's still a tough pill to swallow. I sit at home and listen to guys in MotoGP and this and that, and I think, wow, you know what? In my lifetime, I'm never going to get that opportunity because of my age. Maybe I have the ability, but I'll never get the opportunity. And sometimes you feel like it's political or management decisions that are going to keep you from getting there, because if I could have possibly gotten on a superbike in the last 2 or 3 years after winning these championships like they told me, maybe I'd be in a position now where I could still go. But so those things are hard to swallow, but like I said, I still have a hard job in front of me. I love racing motorcycles, and so be as competitive as I can.
The upside of all that is you've made a freaking ton of money in the last 3 years. If my numbers are correct, are these correct figures? You've made, I estimate you've made between $1.2 and $1.5 million in the last 3 years.
I wish, Dean. I'm not quite there. I can't say. Well, in the last 2 years, I've probably made that much. Yeah, and you know. Yeah, you know what? I came from a family that was very, very, you know, middle class. You know, and I can't believe it. Now I'm finally going to own 2 homes, one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, which is pretty amazing to me. I still have no concept of the money that I've been able to make, and so I'm actually going through a crash course learning about financial stuff right now, so that I make sure that I don't make mistakes with my money. And
no, you're wrong. It's your money and your wife's money.
Well,
that's why you can't make mistakes, and hence the crash course.
Yeah, I'm taking the crash course. I can just
imagine who your instructor is.
She's actually pretty smart. I got me one that was graduating college with an accounting degree, so unfortunately she's probably tricky too. But But you know what? She's a pretty good girl. I know she's good at spending money. She's an aspiring club racer herself, and I got to talk to Jim about her tire budget here really soon.
Have I told you about my hearing aid?
Jim, tell us about your racing career. These are always great stories. Come on.
What can I say? I was pretty good. I was better than some guys that I've worked with from time to time, and not as
You're
good
the
as some.
only guy I know of that Kenny Roberts has actually went out of his way to say that you were actually a guy who was pretty fast. He never said that about anybody.
He didn't say anything good about anybody.
He didn't. He never. I mean, Rainey was riding for him, and he still, he was very critical of whatever Wayne was doing when he was winning races.
Well,
but he did go out of his way to say that you were fast.
Yeah, I think what he meant to say was that I impressed him one day because I can remember at Pocono one time we were in the when everybody had TZ750s. Roberts came back from Europe for a race, I think, or I believe it was after he'd already gone. He came back, and he assumed that because I was racing in America and because I was mostly slower than him, that the outside of the track could belong to him if he put his motorcycle there. But that was silly because that's where I intended to go, and I didn't care who was there. No, in all seriousness, I did pretty well. I think looking back on it now, I made a lot of mistakes. You'll find this a little hard to believe, but I was a little shy at the time, and I wasn't smart enough to figure out the part about, I should ask guys like Al Ludington, what he thought about the fact that my bike wouldn't accelerate off the corner when I opened the throttle. Was it something I was doing wrong, or was it something in the carburetors, or could I ask Josh, what am I doing here wrong, or whatever? I was too, I think I didn't see the big enough picture. I didn't see that it wasn't all me. The reason that that there was resources that I wasn't relying on or asking the right questions. I wasn't brave enough to do that kind of thing, I think. And part of that, I think, is, in truth, I think part of that is being Canadian. You're a little more, reluctant to put yourself forward. Steve Krevia, of course, accepted.
Wait a minute, you're blaming this on being Canadian?
Well, I mean, modesty, I think, is a Canadian trait that, one way you define yourself as a Canadian is to say that you're not American, I guess, but, But looking back on it, I think that I could have done a better job. I think I could have done better than I did. I think I did. I look back and I think I did pretty good. I managed to avoid a real job for a long time. But more to the point, I think that if I made mistakes, it was because I wasn't smart enough to see, for instance, that the thing to do when your TT350 wasn't fast enough was not to try to fix it yourself. The thing to do was put the engine in a box and send it to Don Vesco.
Buy a TZ450.
And or whatever, or cheat, make a TZ450 or whatever, whatever it took. I thought because I didn't have the money that I needed to do it myself. What I needed to do was work harder, get some money, and send it to somebody who could make it fast, and there are things you can do yourself and there are things you can't do yourself. And it's, I look now at the job I do now with Dunlop, and I think, there are guys who come to me and say, look, I know that I can spend $8,000 on an engine job that'll get me half a second a lap or whatever for 6 races before it blows up, or I can spend $8,000 on tires and I can go a second a lap faster at all the races this year, and that's what you have to do. That's the kind of stuff you have to figure out. And it's not an easy world. Nobody's going to give it to you. And I think I did quite well with the resources I had. I was sponsored most of the time that I raced. But I could have been smarter about it looking back at things.
Multi-time national champion in Canada, correct?
Yeah. I mean, as I say, I did.
There were some fast guys up there then.
At one time.
Miguel?
What's that?
Did you ever beat Miguel?
Did I ever beat Miguel? I beat his dad, who was, now you talk about ferocious guys. But, yeah, I did, as I said, I did quite well. I mean, I made money, Josh is talking about sitting here making, the kind of money he makes, but I remember going to a regional race in Pocono and winning the thing. At that time, it was sort of almost like a pro-am type thing. It was an AMA national almost sort of thing. And I won the thing. And I made $1,000. I made $1,000. I'd never had U.S. I'd never had $1,000 in my life before. I mean, I was so paranoid on the drive home. I was like, well, do I leave it in the car? What if I get rolled and I'm walking down? Well, I don't know. If I walk down, leave my pocket, the pocket. I don't know what to do now. $1,000 is nothing these days, you know.
You know, one of the best paying races I ever won, or I don't think I won, I got on the podium, was a Canadian Superbike race at Mossport.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that one time, the racing in Eastern Canada was where you went. If you were anywhere from the northeast of the United States as far down as Washington or even into Virginia and stuff, I mean, that was where you went. If you wanted good racing, you went to Canada. That's where the good racing was. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in that time, you know. So
I got a question for you, Jim, because you got a pretty good historical perspective. Not to say you're old, just you got good historical
not to say memory.
Don't you think that back when you raced, the racers were much more of a jack of all trades, whereas now things are much more specialized? In other words, a club racer, a national level racer, he wouldn't think of rebuilding his engine himself anymore. He wouldn't think of rebuilding his forks.
Yeah.
He wouldn't think of fitting his tires.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, we're getting a lot more specialized. You think that was as much of the case as anything?
Yeah, I really do think so. I mean, I think that's right. I hadn't thought about it, put a lot of thought into that, Al, but I think you're right. I think that it's what you did. I mean, that's why it's important to be smart when you go racing. I mean, I think now of a guy named Doug Teague who that I raced with. Doug worked at Chrysler in Detroit, and Doug had a very successful racing career. He was really fast. He was a smart guy. Only after he quit did the rest of us realize that he had built himself a dyno and had a dyno at his shop, you know. I mean, the rest of us were stupid, you know, by comparison, certainly. And Doug was smart enough to figure out that if I can do this on the straightaways, then I don't have to do it in the corners and stuff, that kind of thing, you know. So, but, you know, and I'm sure he was taking his forks apart, and I'm sure he was doing that kind of stuff. You know, we would do that stuff, but probably not as well, you know. I mean, so yeah, you're right. People used to do more, you know. You'd fit your own tires, and you'd you know, if your shock was bad, you'd change the spring or whatever, you think, that kind of thing, you know. But nowadays, I think you're right. I don't think that kind of thing happens much. People, for better or for worse, rely on suspension guys, and they rely on engine guys or, you know, electronics guys, that kind of thing, I think. I think you're right there. Yeah.
I mean, I've been at it half as long as you, and I see, you know, when I started, you built the engines, you put it in the bike, you loaded the truck in the bike, and then you drove the truck to the races. And now it's like, oh, I don't drive the truck. We got a truck driver. Oh, I don't build engines. We got an engine builder.
Yeah, I've said this before, but, you know, I mean, racing expensive. Josh is kidding. He's not really kidding, but he's talking about tires for Melissa. You know?
I'm pretty sure he's kidding.
Pretty sure he's going to hit me up after this. But people come, and I've said this. I've been quoted as having said this. But, you know, you get a guy walk up to the truck, and he's straddling an $8,000 mountain bike, and he's asking for a discount, you know. What the hell ever happened to sleeping in your van and eating peanut butter sandwiches? That's what we did, you know. I mean, that's a fact of life. How bad do you want to race, you know? Why should I buy my mountain bike tires? I buy my mountain bikes. Why the hell should I support your hobby? You know, show me something. Unfortunately, that's the way the world, the way it works. You know, you got to do something before you can get something, you know.
Yeah, you want to see some drive and some hunger, some desire, yeah. For sure.
I mean, look at a guy like Chaz Davies. Came 2 years ago, came to Mid-Ohio at the end of the year, last race of the year. I didn't know who Chaz Davies was. He's out there on a privateer 600 Yamaha, riding for Barry Gilson and for the Celtic Racing guys. He's running third place in an AMA National and Supersport race. That's how you get a ride, you know. Ride your motorbike. Go fast, you know. That's how it's done. Yeah.
I think there's been a change in riders even since then, because you had maybe a generation of guys that were building their own engines and doing that stuff, and then you had the next generation, which they got a guy or two that helped them out with an engine here and there, and they still kind of figured out suspension, word of mouth, maybe this and that. But then you got into a lot of the party guys, I think. They're the guys that were the superstars of the racetrack, and then nowadays it's not so much. It's become even more specialized in that sense, where riders are becoming true athletes and very disciplined with strict training regimens, and the way of the partier doesn't work anymore. I mean, look at Anthony Gobert. He had the biggest talent in the world, and maybe he was a generation too late. He would have fit in great with the Swanses and those guys, you know, and gone out there and won races and done a great job for everybody. And he came into a time when people were starting to really specialize and really starting to work hard. But I think there's still value in learning to do those things. Yeah. I did a lot of club racing. I kind of came up a unique way, I think, into pro racing and to have the longevity I've had. But I'm a student of the motorcycle. I like learning how they work and understanding it, and I think it helps me ride.
Actually, Josh, I read a couple quotes from you where you said, "Sure, I could, you know, change this thing a millimeter, change that a millimeter, but I'm better off just spending my time going out and riding the thing." And as a mechanic, I really appreciate those kind of comments.
Well, you know, I've listened to a lot of guys, and I've seen guys start searching for something in a motorcycle that's not in a motorcycle. It's in their heart. And I learned a lot. I've been very fortunate. I've had some really good teammates. Maybe they weren't always the best guys to me, but I got to see some successful guys. I got to race against some good people. Nicky, I learned so much from Nicky about just racecraft. You know, he's the one guy in this paddock I think I have not beat that was ever in this paddock. I raced Nicky very, very hard several times. Never beat him. I had Curtis Roberts as a teammate at his prime, and you know, for whatever Curtis is, I got to see some amazing things out of Curtis. I remember racing 600 Supersport. Eric Bostrom had a better 600 than we had in Honda, and Curtis rode with a lot of heart to beat him in that championship at the last race.
You go ahead, rub it in. Yeah.
But, you know, I paid attention to those things,
right,
and
yeah.
I learned a lot from those guys. And it's funny because, you know, being in this position, I've been asked before, hey, who are your heroes in motorcycle racing? Quite honestly, I knew nothing about motorcycle racing until I got involved. And so it's amazing now that I'm racing against guys like Miguel and Aaron Yates and Jason Pridmore and, you know, a lot of these guys, because those are the guys I watched on TV when I first watched motorcycle racing. And here I am racing against them. And I find traits in those guys. Those are the people that I watch. I get to see them firsthand. And I find the traits that I like out of those guys, and those are the things that I try to take and implement into my program.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Jim.
Uh-oh. You're a pretty good moderator, Al. You're pretty good at this stuff.
There's been some huge gains in tire technology probably in the last 5 years, maybe 4 years with the release of the NT.
Yeah, 3-4 years, yeah.
Yeah. What do you see for the future? Do you see another big step like that?
Okay, you want to see my vision? Here's my vision. Okay, injection molded. We do everything: the wheel, the tire, the whole bearings, the whole works.
Well, that sounds pricey to me.
Yeah, but we got control of the market. We're gonna no.
How do you feel about rubber racetracks and concrete tires?
I don't know if there's any money in that. Next big revolution, tires. But yeah, it's hard to say, Al. I mean, you look back, you've been around long enough to see big ones don't come very often.
No, that's true. That's why I ask. I mean, the NT, I would say, is fairly revolutionary.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, for us, it was a necessary, and it was a huge uplift. It took a little while for us to learn that we had to ask people to learn how to ride their bikes a little different and set the bikes up a little different. But in the end, we ended up with a series of tires. We transferred it from Superbike to Super Stock to Super Sport to FX. I mean, we ended up with a series of tires that are safer from a structural standpoint. They're faster. That you can deliver lap times. I mean, time after time, you've seen it, and time after time, you get the same lap times at the end of the race that you get at the beginning of the race, or faster at the end of the race. And there's the drop-off phenomenon, is something we fought for years and years. Sure. We seem to have addressed that with NT. It doesn't stop riders like Miguel or Josh getting off the motorcycle saying that thing was sliding all over the place. You got to do better for me, because those guys are good enough when we give them more to need more.
That's our job.
That's right.
Along those lines, I got a question for Josh. We don't need you, Dean, if you can. No, on that particular point of the tire drop and off and stuff, because you've been on both. You've been riding long enough to be on both sides of the NTs, where there's some guys, recent riders, even Ben Spies, he might not have ever had to ride on a non-NT tire. He must have been pretty close there.
He did, yeah.
But he did on Formula Extreme bikes before it's a super bike, I believe.
Do you find that it takes tire management over the course of the race out of the equation, or does it just change it around a little bit?
It's just different, I think. One thing that the NT did is it changed the riding style that was to be successful on the motorcycle. It catered to certain styles, and it forced riders to learn something new. And I'm sure there are a lot of mechanics that wish riders would do that more often rather than clicking knobs all day long. And you had to figure out the nuances of a newly developed tire that had different goals in mind. And I think that originally, when the tires first came out, the NT really hurt in side grip. But it was as good as qualifiers that we had before on drive grip. And so you had to figure out, hey, you know what? I've been hearing about dirt track racing. They stay off the side of the tire as much as they can, get it stood up, and I think that's a big part of why Matt Mladen had his success is that catered to him in a big way, or he figured it out.
He figured it out, I think,
faster than anybody else, and he really used that to his advantage. So I think it's like anything else. You get a new part, and it caters to a certain way a thing needs to happen. That's engineering versus the art of riding one. And at some point, you have to figure out, hey, what makes this machine work the best, and you have to change your style and your approach as a rider.
Yeah, I think if you look at two guys in your team last year, Jake and Miguel, I mean, Miguel adapted very quickly to the positive points of the NTs. You know, he said he was able to grab, this is good on, it's good on bumps, it's good on this, it's good on that. And Jake will be, I think, one of the first to admit that he had a problem. You know, he had a problem adapting the tires. It took him a little longer than the other guys. You know, we had to finally just point out to him, Jake, this is what's happening. You know, and it's got to be. I mean, you got to think about, is there something you can do to make it happen for you here, sort of thing. And he figured it out. It just took a little longer, you know. So.
I remember when you introduced that at a test, and I believe it was Road Atlanta. It might have been Virginia, but Miguel came in. He rode on it. He came in, and of course the gearing was off because the tire didn't grow, and you need to change your spring rate on the back of the bike, which we figured out pretty quick. And he came in, and he says, "Yeah, this is a pretty good tire. I'd like to continue on a little bit more." And then when you guys walked away, he grabbed me by the shirt and said, "Listen, dude, this is the tire of the future. It's not a little better. It's a lot better, and we need to figure it out."
He didn't tell me that.
And he goes, at the next test, that's all I want to run is NTs. And as you may remember, we got right onto the NTs, and we won the last 3 races of the season because Miguel, as well as Matt, has that kind of style, easy in, shoot it out.
Oh, Miguel's always been one you can see him leaving Blackies from the apex of the turn.
Yeah, but I remember he was like, "Man, this isn't a little better. This is."
Yeah, Josh is right. Not everything is better about the tires. I mean, there's some things that are not as good, but the positives definitely outweigh the negatives. You know,
and they've developed better. They definitely improved over the years to cater to more people. And you know, I was in a little bit different position, being on a support team at the time. Stamboli was really good visually at watching people and figure out how they were going fast. And we watched Matt Mladen a lot to try to figure out how to get the ZX-10 around the track really well. And that was before we were getting the NTs. You know, it was still a development tire, and we weren't quite in the pecking order. But every once in a while, I'd get up there and beat up on Eric Bostrom on Michelin's, and Jimmy'd say, "Hey,
here come the yellow guys in the shirt. You're walking down.
Here's you a good one. Why don't you go kick his butt?" And, you know, that tire was worth a second a lap, and over a race distance, that was a lot of time. And
because the fact it didn't fall off as quickly.
Right.
So it added up as the race went on.
And so, man, you know, it would really turn things around. So I made sure I made a big thing about chasing Eric around that year, making sure I got the good tires for the rest of the year. But no, it definitely made a difference. But we preemptively, we saw the way that the faster guys were riding the motorcycles. We tried to do it on the standards, which would do that job, but not as well as the NT. So when we got the NT, it was instantly a second a lap. I remember Jake saying, the second I put one of those things on, I lose a second lap because he didn't have the side grip that he needed to feel comfortable. And it just took him a little bit of time to come around with it.
That must have been the year you were being particularly nice to Jim's daughter.
No, I mean, it sort of goes back to what we were talking about adapting to, we're going to leave my daughter out of this. She's smart enough to handle herself. But no, I mean, Josh, it's an example of the kind of thing I was talking about earlier, you know. I mean, you know, it's a hard world out there. Show me something, maybe I can do something for you, you know. I mean, all of us have limited resources, you know, whether it's money or number of tires in your truck or whatever. But Josh is a guy who was doing more than he should have with the motorcycle he had, you know. So, geez, can we help this guy out? It's going to help us if we can help him out. Is there anything we can do, you know? And there was times when we'd come to Josh and Richard and say, "Man, we got one tire. We know it's better. You know, this is it, the only one that's left. And if you set your bike up this way, you're going to be sort of in the ballpark. And Richard, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Josh, are you okay with having one for the race and not one for practice?" And the answer was almost invariably yes. And the answer at the end of the race was almost invariably what we wanted to see or hear, you know. So.
And the more I did that, the more I started, hey, you know what, we'll plan to get you a few for practice down the road if we can. And it kind of just pushed us to the next level so that we actually got to develop our bike around them a little better. And by the end of the year, I think we were racing with you guys a little bit, you know.
Yeah. And before people go off thinking, you know, that we're selectively screwing people, you know, I mean, the long and short of it is that, again, everybody has limited number of resources. We had to convince our bosses back in the factory in England and my boss in Buffalo, New York, that that it was worth spending the extra time and money to make these things. There really was some positives here and stuff. We were all learning together, you know. I mean, people like Josh and Miguel were helping us learn about these things, you know. So,
you know, I think that reinforces a great point that you brought up earlier. You don't go fast because you get the good.
Some real freaky, sort of scary people.
You get the good.
Some real freaky, sort of scary people.
Because you go fast. And you got to go out there for whoever privateers are out listening to this or whatever. You got to go out and ride the thing like you stole it before anybody's going to pay attention to you and help you out. You just can't go around expecting something and go, oh, once I get the good stuff, I'll go fast. It doesn't work like that.
And by the way, Al, you can't see
some real freaky, sort of scary people
on a podcast, okay?
You're really not supposed to.
Some real freaky, sort of scary people.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Segue to a difficult subject. We recently lost a good friend to all of us, I think, in this room, Merlin Plumley. Could each of you guys just give a moment on Merlin?
Yeah, what do you say? You go through life and you try to think, okay, I'll try to do the best I can for people. If I treat people honestly and I treat people fairly, and then that's the kind of treatment you hope to get back, you know. And the thing about Merlin, I've said this before, Al said it, and I know Josh knows it as well. Merlin showed us how you should lead life, how you should live life, how you should do things. I mean, so many times over the course of the number of years I knew Merlin, you think, I need to be a better person. I need to be more like Merlin. You know, I need to just do the right thing and let things fall where they were. I'm not worrying about things for myself. I'm not worrying about, you know, Merlin just wanted to do the right thing all the time. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that Merlin was one of my heroes. He was a guy who showed us how to live life, how you should live life. You can be a better person, you know. Motorcycle racing, it's not the end of the world. Treating people right and getting through life, being good to people is where it's at, you know, and stuff. And Merlin showed us how to do that. And he had fun doing his job, you know, and I don't know what else to say, I guess, except that, you know, it's there's room for improvement in everybody's life. Merlin showed us how to be there where we should be.
Al, you worked with Merlin for the better part of 10 years?
Merlin came on to the team. I had met Merlin, in the very early 90s when he was with Muzzy at Willow Springs. I remember meeting him because, you know, Merlin Plumley, he's like super tuner and just the most gracious guy. Yeah. You know, that was the thing that struck me the most. He's like genuine. Oh, nice to meet you. You know, are you liking your job? You know, oh, just, you know, very gracious, very outgoing. And then I was fortunate enough to start working with him in 1995 when he came back from the World Superbike Wars when he was working for Rumi. And just attention to detail, always had a plan. Preparation was the key with Merlin. If you had everything prepared, you were never going to get caught out. And that was a guy that never got caught out. But for a while, it was just there's myself and Merlin and Ray and one other guy on the team. So we were really busy. Merlin was doing motors and being a crew chief. Ray was doing Miguel's motors. I was handling all his chassis, and that was back when I was driving the transporter and stuff. And we would get into these ridiculous hours where we were getting in there at 5:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were working till, you know, 9, 10, 11 at night, whatever it took. We'd always get there within a couple minutes of each other, and I go in there one morning. Merlin's sitting on a stool, putting on his work shoes, and he looks up at me and he goes, "Man, I got to get up early to beat you in here." But that's just the kind of guy he was. And in our amount of time together, you know, his riders won a lot of races and a lot of championships. My riders won a lot of races, a lot of championships. He was always the very first guy to reach over and shake your hand and say, "Awesome job, you know." And for a long time, it was his rider and my rider going at it for the win, you know. And our whole philosophy, and we discussed it often, was we put our heads together, our information together, and our parts together to raise our team above everybody else. And then come Sunday, may the best man win. And he says, "I hope it's my guy, but if it's not, it better be your guy." And I felt the same way. I hope it's my guy, but if it's not, it better be your guy. And it's just a prince of a guy. I mean, just a prince of a guy. Always had a plan. And another funny story. He was when he came back from Europe, he was a little heavier than he wanted to be, and he says, "Okay, I gotta find some exercise to do that's, you know, going to get me back to where I want to be." And I was running then. I was 5-6 miles a day, and going in. This is pre-kids when I actually had free time, and so he goes, "What do you think about running?" I said, "I really like it. There's no gear involved. You just put on your shorts and running shoes, and you can go out and run, and you don't need anything special." So okay, he goes out and buys some running shoes, and 2 days later he comes in and he got his running shoes in his hand. He walks over to the trash can. He goes, "Nope. Running's not for me." And shortly after that, he got switched onto bicycles.
Cycling, Merlin,
cycling,
man.
and boy, that was for him.
He was a pretty cycler when he rode.
Yeah,
he had a freestyle.
He was a good cycler, but just a very competitive guy, but just the prince of a guy, like Jimmy said. You're sitting there on the plane, and the old lady's struggling with her bag, and Merlin will jump up and help her with her bag, and you're 2 seats closer going, "Oh, dude, that should have been me." Oh, good move, Merlin. But, hated to see him go. Really big hole in our program and pretty much in everybody's lives that was touched by Merlin.
Mr. Hayes?
I think I have a bit of a unique perspective in the fact that, quite honestly, I never worked with Merlin. I never raced against Merlin because he was in the superbike class at a point where I would necessarily have to deal with Merlin. But one of the neatest things about the man was his, I guess, camaraderie and just people who shared in his love of motorcycle racing. He took under his wing, and I can remember him going out of his way a few times to look me up and say, "Hey, you did a good job today on Formula Extreme bikes," back when I was riding for John Orch in 99, racing against Nicky and Curtis and those guys. And it was just amazing that the guy who was tuning for the superstars would take his time to go find a guy like me and say, "Hey, you did a really good job." And when I signed on with Honda in 2000 and 2001, I got to see him a little more often because our pits were a little bit closer together, and he still went out of his way. He seemed to watch our races and seemed to really enjoy, also just being a fan and a spectator and being a part of the sport. And so I watched all of these guys that worked with Merlin, and I've been very, very fortunate that I've worked with some really good guys. Rick Hobbs, Richard Stamboli, Keith Perry. There have been some guys that have been instrumental in what I've done. I can honestly say that Merlin Plumley was a guy whose craft I wanted to learn. And I'm sad that I'm not going to get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Well, where do we go from there?
Yeah. We just gotta do better, folks. We gotta know that.
Well, Miguel and I have decided that one of our key phrases as we battle this upcoming season against stout competition as always, and try and run the Suzuki's down would be WW
Right.
MD.
Right.
What would Merlin do?
Right.
And if you do that, and one thing I learned from Merlin is if you always do the right thing, it's never going to come back on you.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing to remember as we go through life. Especially in the business of racing, ethics get stretched.
Exactly right. Yeah.
There's not a lot of honorable people and ethical people. There's a few, but he was the guy that kind of defined it.
Nope. Merlin's the kind of guy that if the box of parts came in and there was enough for the 3 riders and there's enough for 2 to have 2 and 1 to have 1, Merlin would take the 1 and
and he'd go beat your butt with it.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah. So. Yeah.
We don't go to Brainerd anymore. Anybody else got a serious problem with that?
I'm bummed about it.
I'm bummed about it.
I love Brainerd. Not only did I like the racetrack because it was so unique, it was really cool being up there in the summer because you'd be sitting there doing your paperwork and you go, "Oh, it's getting dark out. Must be time for dinner." Holy mackerel, it's 11:15. And the people were friendly. And the
hotel had a water park in it.
And the hotel had a water park with girls with bikinis. What about you, Josh? You wrote it. I just got.
Yeah, you know what? I just had the one thing I had to remember because I actually did really well at that racetrack. It was really a good racetrack for me, and I felt like turn one, as fast as it was one of my stronger points. And but I had to tell myself, and I had to remember, you can't go down and stand on the wall in turn one and watch races until you're finished racing for the weekend.
I did that one time. It's the scariest thing I ever did.
I think one of the guys that really woke me up to turn one was I actually watching John Kaczynski go through there on a Ducati, and I don't think he'd ever lift. He used the limiter to slow him down.
He must have been standing beside me that day.
I think so.
Pretty
sick to watch.
There was fast guys going through there, and then there was John Kaczynski.
Remember the World Superbike race up there? What was that? 88, 89?
89 and 90.
Watching those guys.
I've got a video of a Formula USA race there with Robbie Peterson and Rich Oliver on 500 Yamahas against Chuck Graves on a Yoshimura Suzuki 1100. Pretty good race if I remember correctly.
I'd love to start going back to Brainerd again. It was sort of like club racing, but it was better than that. It was just, you go there and the people were nice. It was a nice area to be in. It was good racing. It was a different racetrack. It was
I led my one superbike lap there on a privateer bike, on a semi-factory bike. And
I loved going there. I always thought it was a cool place. I wish we could go back.
I thought it was the coolest thing. I had 5 mile an hour on Matt Mladen in the middle in the apex of turn one. I thought that was pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
Were you afraid going through turn one?
Absolutely, every lap.
Oh, that makes me feel so much better. It does. Because when I club raced there, I was terrified going through turn one.
I can tell you,
terrified.
If any racer says they weren't, they're pretty much lying to you. But turn one at Daytona scares me. So I can't really say too much. You just got to have a lot of respect.
Remember Cork Ballington? Cork Ballington went there the first year he rode there. He did some practice, and he came in the pits, and he got off the bike, and he stood there, and he pointed down the straightaway, and he said, corners like that one down there went out of style in Europe about 10 years ago.
A couple classic lines from I had Jamie James for a rider. He was never short of classic lines, but he'd go, hey, come on, your front straight there, and your balls are about this big, and as you head on down to turn one, it just kind of disappears. And then Miguel, somebody said, are you going through there flat stick? He goes, I'm trying, but my skirt keeps blowing up over my face. That's a manly corner right there.
Yeah. Because when briefly, when I raced there, just those few seconds between turn 10 and turn 1, it was like jumping out of an airplane for me. I was like, I would be like, what am I doing here? Why am I racing?
I learned not to sit up for turn 1. You just stay tucked in and lean over a little bit.
Al, let's talk about Loudon.
Oh, where do you start? The old Loudon, the new Loudon? I mean, the old Loudon was a racer's racetrack, but the facility was a pit. I mean, we used to have to buy plywood to put down in the pits so you could actually put your bike on a stand without it tipping over. And then, of course, you had to post a guard there all night so it was there when you got back. The new Loudon
wasn't fit for habitation by humans.
It wasn't fit to ride a motorcycle around, but the facility was nice. So they kind of, but, obviously Loudon was where I grew up. I went there in, maybe 81 or 82 to watch my first road race. No, it was earlier than that. It was in the 70s. And that's when I said, this is cool. I got to be involved with this without having to pay to get in here. And that's kind of what sparked me. And you know what it was? It was watching the 2 Honda FWS 1000s go around that place, if you can believe that. Yeah. Which I think Ray told me that Randy once tried it. I think Renfro rode one of those, right? Maybe it was him or Baldwin. But anyway,
Mike Baldwin rode one.
They wanted to see what the lap time difference would be if they didn't shift and just left it in third gear. And there's only like a second and a half difference leaving that big bike in one gear around that little racetrack. But you tell people stories about what goes on Animal Hill and back in the campgrounds, and they just look at you with disbelief. I mean, they're like, oh, you're so full of it. But the things, it was just, Jim knows what I'm talking about. I don't know if you ever got up there in the old days, but
I fell off in turn 3 there one time, turned off and fell off in coming out of turn 2, fell all the way, slid all the way to turn 3, and I was like, got up and I was feeling like crap. And I said really bad, and I was like, am I alive? Yeah, I'm alive. And I hear, Alan! Hey, Alan! Hey, Alan! Some guy's reading the name on the back of my leathers. Want a beer?
Well, I'm to show you how much of a newbie I am compared to you two old guys. The very first motorcycle race, road race I ever watched on TV was Motorsports Mundial, I believe, on TNN, when they were showing races there, and they were showing a 750 Super Sport race and Harley race. And I remember watching Aaron Yates crash out of the lead 3 times and still finish 3rd or 4th on a Suzuki at that race. And I thought, that dude's an animal, man. But, it was a racetrack that I can't say was the most fun racetrack I ever went around, but it was a racetrack that I seemed to do pretty good at. And I don't know if I just, coming from some other pretty scary tracks, like, put on the blinders and didn't notice the things around me, but I had some pretty good races there. And in some ways I miss it, some ways I sure don't.
Yeah, I was sorry to see us. I wasn't sorry to see us leave the facility, but I was sorry to see that chain of history get broken. I think that was the longest running consecutive race in the country.
Yeah,
I think they're
so.
up to 78, 80 years, something like that. But we needed to leave that place for sure.
No, it's true. It was a shame to stop going there. It had a lot of history, and it was lots of good reasons to stay, but not many good ones. There lots of good reasons to have to keep having the race, but not many reasons to stay with what we had.
You raced there.
Absolutely, I did.
What was the first year you raced there?
Wow. Let me think. I don't know if I want to admit this or not.
What bike were you riding
I'm
the first
telling
time?
everybody in the paddock.
I went there. I started racing.
72?
No, before that. Well, before that. I think I went there and I started racing in 1967. I think I went to Loudon first time in 1968. I was
born in
I'm
75.
really, really, really old, but I don't feel it.
Yeah, you don't look it.
Anyway,
me an middle-aged racer.
I went there for a lot of years, and it was a really good racetrack. It was
They had 2 shocks on the back then, right?
2 shocks, absolutely.
Two shocks.
Why? It's like one of those things. Why do you need more than 2? I mean, wait a minute.
Were the tires bias ply or were they wood?
You know, the one thing about the weather today was it was really, really,
Wonderful segue. Wonderful segue. What was it like back then? Was it wild then too? I mean, there was like a Laconia period where it was fairly mild. When did it start to just get insane?
Oh, I mean, I remember people used to camp along the side of the road. You'd go from Concord. There you go. Go from Concord up to the racetrack, and people would literally camp alongside the road. Just anywhere they wanted to. If you had a house, people would camp in the between your house and the road and stuff, and that was okay. It wasn't really a lot of trouble. But one year we went, and there's signs every couple of 100 yards. There's signs: no camping, no camping, no camping, no camping. And then I think it started getting ugly after that. I mean, it started to get to be trouble. I think I don't know whether they concentrated everybody at the track or what. And it wasn't like there wasn't any trouble before
they were back to camping again.
Back on the sides of the road?
Yeah. I remember all of them lining up to watch the tractor trailers come in and out on Sunday. I saw Austin Powers and quite a few other people.
They were camping there just spectating.
Oh, I
They
see.
set up all their lawn chairs and they hold it to shine.
No, that was people in the houses, but this was actually putting tents up along the road, and they never were in them. They were just sort of sat on their beer and cases of beer and stuff. But literally, it was that kind of thing. And then it got kind of messy, I think, in the early 70s, and it really wasn't a family-oriented event.
Picture this. There's a national going on, okay? There's a superbike race going on. The spectators are shooting bottle rockets at the leaders, okay? And if they were lucky enough to hit one, a big roar went up. I was working with David Sadowski when I first went up there, who was a local. And they'd shoot bottle rockets, and Ski would go by, and there'd be a little lull in the bottle, because he's a local. You don't shoot bottle rockets at the locals. And then they'd commence to fire into the guys behind them. And it was, there you are, racing your heart out, and there goes a bottle rocket across your face shield.
There was, I mean, without exaggeration, there were parts of the spectators where you didn't go. You just didn't go. I mean, if you were smart, you just didn't go there, And they, all that stuff about burning trucks and cars and all that stuff was true. It happened, but And
Well, probably saw the progression of the outhouses. They started with wooden outhouses, and they all got burned down. So they built concrete outhouses, and they all got blown up.
people drove cars into them or whatever.
Then they made these huge. They took these huge steel conduits and just cut them down and cut a hole in the door, and that became the outhouse. They were hard to blow up, and they were hard to burn up.
It was not the glory days of American racing.
The East Coast, that's some sophisticated stuff from my Midwestern bumpkin background. Wow. Yale, Harvard, Loudon.
The last year we went there, I remember thinking, going to the outhouse thinking, man, somebody should get this urinal and bronze it or something. Think of all the famous guys who have stood here, Nixon and Roberts and all those guys.
Was that the infamous spot of the Roberts shooting down the Michelin Man type thing? Where did that happen? Do you remember?
I was a racer. I don't know. I didn't know anything about tires at the time, but yeah, that's where it happened. Although it never happened, if you ask Kenny.
Right. He has a bad history with firearms.
I don't know much about that.
Well, he shot himself a couple of times. And
Kenny did,
A couple of times.
Yeah, he shot himself at least twice, accidentally.
You sure it wasn't somebody else?
Really? The Michelin Man down in Loudon.
Yeah, Kenny was riding, it's long enough ago that he was riding on Goodyears at the time, I'm quite sure. And he thought it was funny because he was from rural California, and what you did for fun if you're from Modesto, California, I think, was shoot holes in things and stuff, So. But
I think that still holds today, too.
And I picked on for being from Mississippi.
But I think that the Michelin people probably explained to him that it really wasn't cool, so I think he got a little trouble for that, but it's true story as I understand it,
What was it like racing against those guys?
I wasn't, on a really good day, I could stay for a few laps and see which way they went and stuff, and I don't know, it was pretty obvious. The first time I ever remember Kenny Roberts, for instance, was a race at Pocono, a national race at Pocono, and I was an expert, and he was a junior. And I remember there was a lot of noise on the grid anytime this kid was around, number 80, and the noise was him talking most of the weekend, and beginning of the weekend, I could deal with the kid fine, he was no problem. By the end of the weekend, I didn't know which way he went, he was that good, he learned how to road race really quick, and I was, one of the, I was, as I said, pretty good at that time, and I could hold my own with most of the front runner guys, but he was a natural. He was gone, and he learned really, really quick, So, if you look at Nixon and Aldana and Romero, guys, Roberts, guys like that, they were the Josh Hayes and the Miguel de Hamels and Neil Hudsons, Matt Mladen's, those were the guys and stuff, and Kenny very quickly, as a very young guy, learned how to be a road racer and stuff, and he wanted to do it, and he was going to do it, and he did it, so. I was an East Coast guy from Canada, so I didn't have a lot, there wasn't a lot of cultural intermingling there. I didn't understand it.
There wasn't a lot of culture.
Well, maybe. And again, I was too shy to mix with those guys, or didn't think I belonged. There was a fair bit of that, I think, so.
Was it kind of an outsider deal because you were a Canadian? Who else was
probably
Canadian?
Only because I put myself there. I wasn't cool enough to think I belonged, that kind of stuff, I think, No, I think as with any form of racing, or probably any form of any competition, whether it's basketball or whatever, if you're really good and you mind your own business and pay attention to what you're doing, then you get respect by what you do. And I think that I got some respect by what I did on the racetrack. And if I'd been a little smarter, maybe I would have got a little more respect. But no, those guys were better than me. I don't have any shame. There's no shame in saying it. It's true. They were better than me, and for the most part, they got what they deserved out of racing, which was more than I got,
I still believe you were very good, but I'd ask you this: who's the best guy who's the best guy you've ever seen? Yeah.
Ooh, man. I think Kenny, probably. I think Kenny was the best, I think he really was,
How's Freddie stack up in there?
It's my judgment has to be a little bit clouded because when Kenny hit his peak and Freddie hit his peak, Freddie was a Michelin guy and Kenny was a Goodyear and or Dunlop guy. So my judgment's a little bit clouded. But I think if you were to assume that they were equal, then I think you have to look at things like who did what for the sport, who did what for motorcycle racing aside from his own personal selfish interest. Freddie's got a wonderful record. He's a wonderful human being today, you know. And but Roberts was clever enough to see a bigger picture, or cared enough to see a bigger picture. You know, Kenny Roberts stood on the podium at the Spanish Grand Prix and said, "I don't really need your trophy. You're not paying me any damn money here. You know, you guys obviously need money worse than I do. So why don't you just keep it? You know." And this is BS. You know, none of us, we're all racing for start money here. What's this all about? We should be getting prize money. You know, and he figured out how to make this happen, or to be a major part of making that happen. So when you look at the records, you could make a case for the two being the same. I think equally. They're both awesome racers. You know. But then you start to look at other stuff, and I think Kenny was better. You know.
Segue into Nicky Hayden. You raced against Nicky Hayden.
I did.
What was that like? Did you? Was it a situation where you learned something from him?
Yeah, I did. Of course, we had talked about this a little bit while you were.
I was hoping you were going to bring that up, because this is the only good question I had.
No, Nicky was the one guy in the paddock that I can think of right now that I never beat. The kid taught me a lot about racecraft, and I think we had talked earlier about this. You know, at some point I kind of figured it out that Earl had told me, probably back in their Wera days when he was bringing Roger to all the Wera races that I was racing, that, you know, those three boys would go dirt tracking 3 and 4, sometimes 5 nights a week at different dirt track races that they had pretty close to their home in Kentucky. They spent a lot of time driving around in their box van doing dirt track racing. And you start thinking about all the heat races and the mains that they did and all that time. And when Nicky turned 21 years old, he probably had more race starts than I might ever have in my lifetime. You know, when it comes to experience. And so even though Nicky is quite a bit younger than me, there was still a lot to learn from the kid, because he had experienced more motorcycle racing than I had by a long shot. And so I raced him the absolute best that I could, and I gave him some of my best races. And but I was still a student of his, you know, in a sense. And there were races where I was faster than him, but somehow he outfoxed me there at the end and beat me to the line. And it wasn't just me. He did it to a lot of people. I saw him do it to, I believe, Curtis at Brainerd in the last turn, and nipped him to the finish line. You know, there seemed like with a guy like Nicky, there were a lot of those where he figured him out right there at the very end. He didn't know how he was going to do it, but he put it together, and it's something I've tried to learn from.
First time Nicky wheeled away on a Honda Superbike, Al Ludington was his crew chief. Why don't we talk about that period a little bit?
Actually, the first event was it was pretty entertaining, because Miguel was hurt. That wasn't the entertaining part. And they decided they were going to put Nicky on his bike at Mid-Ohio. Well, they also decided that Nicky should race the other 2 classes he was racing as well. You know, 3 classes in a weekend out of would they have 4 or 5 classes on the schedule? So he goes out in his first race, and I think he's working his way up. I don't know if he's up to a podium position or not. And they get about 4 laps from the end, and I think he's riding around 3rd or 4th or something. He doesn't come around. Instantly, my phone rings. It's Miguel. He fell down, you know. Thanks, Miguel. I already figured that out. Nicky comes in. He goes, I was too tired to hang on to it anymore. So that was the first go around. Yeah, and then we went to Elkhart Lake, where he struggled a little bit. I think he got a 7th or an 8th, and once again doing the other 2 classes as well. And then we went to Colorado, which I think was the last race of the year that year, and he got the thing on the podium. He had a terrific battle with Pascal and Doug Chandler, maybe?
Right, probably, yeah.
And they were getting down towards the end, and Doug and Pascal and Nicky were going at it, and I'm like, hate to say it, I don't think I'm going to like the way this one's shaping up, you know, because despite all his experience in the Superbike class, he was still a rookie. But he learned really fast. As far as I recall, he didn't change the bike at all. He just went out there and rode it. And he says, you know, right now I don't really have anything to add to the setup, so I'm just going to go ride it, which I appreciated. it was fun. We were just out there to have fun. And Honda wanted to take a look at this kid on a super bike, and Miguel's bike was open, so away we went, and it was fun.
Jim Allen, Nicky Hayden.
Nicky was a real quick learner. He was a really always easy guy to work with. He always was looking. Wouldn't sugarcoat it, but he was always found a way to say what he needed to say about tires, or and he would give you an honest input. And if he wasn't riding well enough to say anything, he said, "Right now I'm too busy. I'm doing other things. I can't think about it too much." Or right now everything's fine. Or this is what I feel. I'm not really sure I understand if it's right, or I'm not sure I'm telling you this right, but this is what I feel. So very easy guy to work with, and always looking for the positive things and stuff, and never making excuses. He left it to people like Merlin and whoever was the crew chief to, if we got enough tires, this is the one I like, that kind of thing. Nicky was never demanding, or never really overly demanding. He just wanted to do the best he could, and he was clever enough to use people like me and Merlin and whoever else might be involved to his advantage. Not that he used us; it's just that relied on us as a resource, I think, or is a better way to put it. Real easy guy to work with, and one of the few people, I think it's fair to say, who remained a good, solid human being, through, from being a nice kid when he started to being a nice man now. Nicky will walk in the room right now and just be one of the guys. He's a Grand Prix superstar, but he would enjoy spending time with real people anytime.
That's interesting. You point out he would use the people for what they're supposed to be used for, the tire guy and the crew chief. But on the flip side, he made you feel so good about it that you wanted to put out for him.
Exactly.
You wanted to do the right thing, as Merlin would say. And so it was, he kind of got this kind of reciprocal thing going pretty quickly with the people that he needed to get the things that he needed to go win races. He's very clever.
I think a part of that is people wanting to work with somebody who rides with all their heart. He seemed to be a person who did that. It didn't matter if his motorcycle was good or bad that day. Right. He's a guy who rode with heart. Whatever he was given, he was going to race it the best that it could be raced on that day that he was capable of doing. I remember a Colorado race maybe the next year where he basically rode the tire to absolutely nothing. Because it was
no rubber left. There was none
shot he had.
Nicky, you're not supposed to be showing the competition our casing. Stop that.
Melissa still asks me, so how far will this thing go good if you keep one heat cycle? I said, I've seen Nicky ride one to like the third or fourth set of cords. It should be good.
Man, she does need a tire deal.
Shut up, Dean. Shut up.
I'm tight on tires, man.
Final subject, so everybody can get off to bed. Curtis Roberts. Jim, we're going to start with you.
I think Curtis is an enigma. You get to use all the cliches you want. I think Curtis is a good person. I think he really is. People say this, say that about Curtis Roberts, but I'll give you an example of what kind of guy he is. For years and years, I carried a Swiss Army knife. 20 years I had the Swiss Army knife, and I used it every day. So paranoid I was going to lose it, Sure as guns, I'm leaving Daytona here, and I forget it's in my pocket. And I go through TSA or whatever, and they take the knife away from me. I'm ranting and raving. I'm going to get through the security, and I'm upset. I'm PO'd. I really wanted to have that knife, and it's gone now, and I'm sitting in the bar, and I'm complaining to everybody who's ready to listen about my knife, on and on, Get on the plane, get home. 2 or 3 days later, there's a Swiss Army knife showing up in the mail from Curtis Roberts, That really meant a lot to me. It really did, Curtis had decided to do something, and stuff for somebody else. So I think he's a good human being. I think, some of that goes back to, I'm not sure what Curtis's home life was like, but I'm glad I had my dad for a dad, and I'm glad Kenny Sr. wasn't my dad, I think he had a tough go. I think that, Curtis was a little too intense in some areas and didn't understand that part of the package was being a more rounded human being. We all have to feel happy in our jobs, and Curtis didn't make us all feel happy in our jobs all the time, It's easy to have friends when you're winning, but when you're not winning, it's not so easy to have friends, if you treat people that way. And Curtis was not the easiest guy to work with all the time, I think that, he's probably, he probably wishing he did some things different in his life and made some different decisions than he made. But, for the most part, for sure, I don't have a problem with Curtis as a person at all. You know, I think that he, you look at guys like Curtis and you know, Anthony Gobert, and you just think, I wish I'd had that much talent. You know, I wish if I'd had that much talent, I could have done more, sort of thing. And I think Curtis and Anthony could have had better careers, longer careers than they had if they'd made some different decisions in life. So,
Josh,
you know, I think a lot of people have been able to see that Curtis has a side of him that can be definitely be a bit abrasive. But the time that I spent around Curtis, for the most part, I think was
you guys were teamed together, yeah?
Yeah, we were teamed together in 2000 on Arian Racings, you know, on Hondas there, and I think I was around Curtis at a time that was really working well for him. He was probably at the top of his game, and people were a lot of times surprised here. I learned a lot from being teammates with Curtis, and a lot about riding with heart, and a lot about you can't always fix the motorcycle. Sometimes you have to ride the thing, and you know, I had a good time as far as that. The timing was right. He was a great teammate to have that year. I mean, you'd see the little things. I saw him crash a couple of bikes at press intros and photo shoots, and he'd laugh it off, and not everybody thought that was so funny, but
especially when there was only one of the bikes.
Yeah, I seem to remember that one. In fact, I think it almost took me out in the process. But you know, he is a great talent, and it's weird. It's an interesting business. Sometimes you get second chances like that, and it seems like if I don't know if he just doesn't have it in his heart anymore. At one time, he definitely did, and you got to see it on the racetrack. And I'm sure it's Curtis's decision. Whenever he's ready, you know, he has the talent to see his way through it, I think.
But it's been 4 years since he's been competitive.
Wouldn't be an easy road to come back, but that's probably what it would take to prove himself a little bit that he was serious and had the heart. You know, I think Anthony Gobert got quite a few chances too, and people were if you're fast, I think people are willing, but you know, a lot of people put a lot of work into what a rider can do. You know, you have to have a good motorcycle, a good crew, a support system around you, and you know, you'd have to prove that I think that he's willing to work with that. And again, the guy was a huge talent, and I was around him at the right time, and I hate it.
Would your hair be completely gray had you ever worked with Curtis Roberts?
You might not realize it, but I did work with Curtis Roberts. When Curtis rode the 250 for Arian Racing, he had won a national, but he said, you know, this bike does not handle like the Yamahas. This is not going to, you know, this bike needs to be way better. So we had just gotten the CompuTrack, and we were dealing quite a bit with Greg McDonald, who designed and invented the CompuTrack. And after some talking and stuff, we decided we were going to make a proper RS 250. So we fixed the swing arm angle where we wanted it, because we figured it didn't have enough swing arm angle in it. And then our fabricator, Tom Job, took the chassis out back, and he milled the steering head out of it. And he built a new one out of billet and welded it in where we wanted it. So we went up to the streets of Willow. We took his 250 that had just won the Mid-Ohio National. He went and did a baseline. At that time, the streets of Willow was very small. It took like 55 seconds to get around. And then he took out this bike we built, and it was immediately 2 seconds quicker around this little racetrack. And so we finished it up, buttoned it up with some help from Kenny's guys, I think Brian Tufree. And we did it over at Arian Racing. And he went out and he demolished the competition the last 4 races of the year with this bike. And he was a joy to work with. He was 18 or 19, I believe, at the time. And he listened. He didn't talk a lot, which, you know, he got over that. And he gave you the feedback you wanted, and he was a nice kid. You could tell he was a nice kid, you know. His heart was in the right place and whatnot. And then I was involved on a couple teams where I wasn't his crew chief, but he was on our team, and he was very difficult. One of the things we were trying to get him to do was to trail brake. He would just kill the brakes, release, and then try and carry this corner speed, and it wasn't working. So we were working with Freddie Spencer. We'd like you to spend a couple days at the Freddie school. Oh, Freddie, because obviously in his family, there was not a lot of love for Freddie. So he goes, so I'm talking about, why don't you want to go? He goes, well, what the hell's Freddie going to teach me? And I said, I recall a couple incidences where he schooled your old man, so I imagine he could teach you a thing or two. And he thought about that, and the next week he went. And when he came back from that school, that's when he started winning races on the RC51.
Right.
And he was like, sometimes I should just shut up and listen. I'm like, yeah, you probably ought to tattoo that on your arm somewhere or something. But my experiences with Curtis were pretty much all positive. I mean, I could see how difficult he was in a lot of situations, but I didn't have to deal with that side of Curtis. I worked with him at a young enough age where he hadn't developed the attitude that he's known for at times, and he always charged hard. He got what he could get out of the bike, and I'd like to see him, be in a better spot because he has a lot of talent, and like I said, I've always gotten along with him. I have nothing really negative to say about Curtis. He's a good kid and he rides hard.
The only Curtis story I have is that one time, I think everybody in the press pretty much has a really abrasive relationship with Curtis for whatever reason. He just has no respect for anybody that's in the press, and I don't know if it's false or if it's sincere, but it's not that you hit him on the wrong day. It's like you got to hit him on the right day, and So I had one very sincere conversation with Curtis, and I asked him, what is the biggest misconception about you? Just tell me, just tell me what's in your head. And he said the biggest misconception about me is that I'm my father's son. He said, everybody thinks that I'm have my finger to God, touching God. He said, there were years I only saw my dad 3 times after we got divorced. He said that went on for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. He said, we don't have a close relationship. We never have. So, I thought that was probably the most profound thing to learn about Curtis is, although Kenny Roberts is his father, really, at that point, and that was when he came back from Europe the first time, they didn't have a very close relationship.
I think I got to see a lot of that, being his teammate. I think it was hard for Curtis to find his own identity. He had a father and a brother who were world champion MotoGP riders, and I can remember being in line, and for me, this was extremely humbling. If you ever want to be humbled, sit in line with Miguel Duhamel, Nicky Hayden, and Curtis Roberts, and there's 4 of you in line having autographs, and people are taking your poster because they took everybody else's. They should get yours too, so they don't make you look like an idiot.
They're not bothering to get yours signed.
They just take whatever was sitting there, and I can't tell you how many times people would call Curtis Kenny, or they never said, "Hey Curtis, you did a great job today." It was, "How's your dad doing? Hey, your brother's riding really good over there," and it was constantly like that. So, unfortunately, I think Curtis would get so worked up that when somebody did say, "Hey, you rode really good today," Curtis would look at him and say, "I thought I rode pretty good yesterday too." I think he felt a little uncomfortable like that.
I've seen a very, very similar thing working with Miguel for this amount of time. Miguel grew up under the shadow of his dad. Granted, I think he had a much closer relationship with his dad than Curtis ever had with Kenny, but there was this big cloud over Miguel for years, being a Vaughn's kid. And it was the same thing. "How's your dad doing?" "Oh, that's a Vaughn's kid." You really want to get him ticked off? Call him a Vaughn's kid. Call him Sophie's little boy. But it's been very rewarding to watch him come out from under that cloud, and now he casts his own shadow. But I think Curtis and him had similar identity issues. Growing up, obviously, they both handled them a little bit different, but, you hit the nail on the head on that one.
Really, the last question.
Uh-oh.
Jim.
How old am I? No.
Man, you had a unique perspective on the whole Duhamel family there. You raced against the old man, and you must have known Miguel since he was almost in diapers.
Yeah, somewhere.
So you really know how old he is.
I do, actually.
I was going to say, that's as elusive as Miguel's age.
I do. Actually, I have a picture. I have a clipping from a Montreal newspaper, and from a Quebec race that Yvonne's dad was racing at, and I was racing at. And in this magazine, in this newspaper article, Yvonne is standing with his leathers on, two-piece leathers, just had the pants on. At that time, they zipped together at the waist. And he's watching his two kids ride mini bikes around the paddock. One's Mario and one's Miguel. And the clipping is dated, and in the cut line under the picture, it clearly states the age of the two children. So I do know how old he is.
Is Mario the older brother, or is
Mario's
Mario
the older brother?
okay.
Yeah.
That was kind of in question.
But yeah,
for
we
a
used
while.
to, when we raced in Canada, Yvonne rather would show up at the races with Sophie and the kids, and he'd unload his mini bikes, whatever they were happened to be destroying at that particular time, and they would proceed to ride around the paddock all weekend long, and we would say, those GD Duhamel kids, geez, they're everywhere, and if they weren't Yvonne's kids, they'd stop them right away, and those GD kids are a pain in the ass. But yeah, I do know how old they are. Yeah, for sure.
Your thoughts on Miguel, knowing him that long?
Yeah, he's another really good human being. I mean, Miguel's he's sometimes quick to anger, but he's also very quick to forgive, and he's a really good guy, really good human being, and a guy with a big heart. If you ever saw both eras, ever saw both the Hamels as racers, you'd have a hard time picking out which one was the most aggressive. His dad was ferocious on the motorcycle, and Miguel is often very ferocious on the motorcycle. So, Miguel he's got a soft spot in my heart. He's one of those people that, I'm proud and pleased to say I worked with him for a long time.
I got a pretty good one. I remember back in 1999, showing up at Daytona, and I go out in my very first 600 Super Sport AMA practice ever. And I had been there for the week before for the CCS stuff and done pretty well. And the first person I see out there is Miguel Duhamel. And I'm like, what have I got to lose? So I latch onto this guy with everything I've got. And I spent a good 15 minutes doing laps with him and Rich Oliver on a Yamaha. And I remember coming into the pits after we had done quite a few laps and looking at my mechanic, Barry McMahon, going, Barry, if that's as fast as they go, I can race with these guys. This, and just like being overwhelmed. These are guys I'd watched on TV, and I had yet to race against them, but I was expecting, so much. It was way above my expectations. And I went back out in the same practice, and I found him again. We just seemed to find each other on the racetrack, and it happened all weekend. But I remember later that afternoon, I'm walking through the paddock, and I see Al Ludington, who walks up to me and goes, "Hey, kid." And I'm like, uh-oh. He goes, hey, you're doing all right out there. And the old man says, he called him the old man. He goes, the old man says, you're riding pretty clean and everything, and he doesn't mind riding with you. You don't pull over and, whatever. You're riding with your head on, and he doesn't say too many nice things about too many people out there. I think at the time he was known as a bit of a hothead on the racetrack. So, it was actually one of the biggest compliments I think I'd ever gotten, and one that I still remember. And I remember right before the 200, I was walking down pit lane, and I was finished racing for the weekend, and I saw Miguel, and I went, "Hey, Miguel, good luck today." And he looked at me like, "Whatever, dude." He had no idea who I was without my helmet on.
Okay, I want to wrap this up. I want to thank you guys all for coming. Al Ludington, Jim Allen, and Josh Hayes. Thank you very much, guys.
It was fun. Thanks.
Soupkast is brought to you by American Honda.